why you need a podcast audit, crystalproffitt.com/episode 324. This is my show, the Proffitt Podcast, if you haven't listened to it and checked it out. But I really wanted to talk about how having a podcast audit can make all the difference. Now, I go into, if you watch the YouTube, my YouTube channel on a regular basis, I put out a YouTube channel on, a YouTube video on what a podcast audit is. So if you haven't checked that out, I meant to link to that in the show notes, but I'll link to it. But basically, I just go, if you go to my channel, there we go. So let me take that off. So here is the YouTube channel. You can see I'm live right here. But over here, you'll see one that says, what is a podcast audit and how to get one. That is more of, and we can talk about that here in a second too, like actually how to get a podcast audit, what that looks like. This is a video for those of you that are pretty visual and you want to see like, well, what is she actually talking about? Because today's podcast episode was more of why you need one. And this is a video on what that actually looks like. Like, what is a podcast audit? What does that actually look like? And then today's podcast episode is more of why you need it. And then we talk about why podcasters want an audit. So this is really what I did. So last year, and this is where I got the video, like the example of what a podcast audit is. I went and I grabbed some footage from one of our podcast audits that we did. I believe it was in May of 2021. And I took clips of it and I put it in this YouTube video. I edited it and looked all great. But I wanted to talk about the reason why people were submitting to have their podcast audited in the first place. And that's what you'll see in the show notes. And that's what we're talking about. I'm talking about the actual reasons people submitted their podcast to me to be audited, because I just loved going back and reading them. I loved seeing why people wanted their show to be audited, because it was deeper than, am I on the right track? And it was deeper than, I just want someone to hear what I have to say. Now, some of them were that. They were just like, I just threw everything together. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm hoping that I'm on the right track. I got my fingers crossed. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't really know. And some of them are a lot more specific. So this one right here is, I have no idea what I'm doing. I was just winging it and made a podcast one day out of nowhere. Raise your hand if you can relate to that, because I feel like that's kind of how I started everything. And then someone else said right here, hopefully to be able to improve the way that I can connect with my audience. Obviously, we all want growth, but I want to create quality content that is easy to digest no matter who you are. So that's really what we talk about on the podcast episode. So again, it's why you need a podcast audit. Go to crystalproffitt.com/episode 324. And I think that, if you're watching here today, I'd love to know why you think a podcast audit could benefit your show, because I think it's above and beyond just, hey, will you listen to this? This is something I talked about in the video of, what is a podcast audit? People will come to me and I get these messages all the time. Like, I actually looked back in my Facebook messages. You know how there's like a catcher, like if you're not friends with somebody or you've never had a message before, there's kind of like this catcher of, here's all the messages. They're not trying to spam you or whatever, but you have to approve them before you let them actually come to your inbox. And I got this recent message that was, hey, I love your content. I love what you do. Can you listen to my podcast and give me feedback? I get those all the time. I get them all the time. And at first it was like real flattering and I was able to do it. I'm like, oh my gosh, people want me to look at their podcast. Sure, I will go listen to it. I'll give you feedback. But now it's not at a capacity that I'm able to do it for everybody that asks me. I get a lot of those messages and I don't even have time to respond to as many that reply to me, because when I do a podcast audit, it's not just, This was great. Keep it up. It is, okay, here's a few ideas around your podcast title. And here's a little bit more about the audience that you're speaking to, or your calls to action or lack thereof, or what you could do better on your podcast website, or how you can integrate your marketing strategies here to get more people on your email list or to get them into your funnel. Like, I go all in. I dive off the diving board into the deep end of someone's podcast whenever I do a podcast audit, because that's really adding value. If I think back to when I first started my podcast and I had someone do that, like, I feel like it would just be priceless to have that kind of information from someone who has done it, but also someone who has really made tweaks and changes and tried things and pivoted and rebranded. Like, I talk to people all the time that I can give them actual advice on rebranding their podcast because I've been there. I can give them advice on switching from solo only to interviews or vice versa because I've done it. I can give you advice on recording 5-minute episodes because I've done it. I could give you like advice on recording an hour and a half long podcast with 5 people because I've done it. So I want you to really think about, a podcast audit, like how could that benefit me in what you're doing today? If there's a specific concern that you have, or if you're just getting started and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start because I don't have anything to audit. Well, that's okay. Like, this is something that maybe you could aspire to in the next quarter. If you're thinking, a podcast audit would be really awesome for my show in the future.